Hey, North Dakota, Rob Port here from Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics.
And I'm Chad Oban. We want to hear from you. We're giving away $100 to one lucky listener who takes our new listener survey.
It's quick, it's easy, and it'll take you less than 3 minutes to complete.
Just head on over to plaintalksurvey.com by October 20th. Share your thoughts and you'll be entered for a chance to win.
That's plaintalksurvey.com by October 20th. Help us make Plain Talk even better, and you could get free cash.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Today, we're going to talk about school choice. Later in the program, we are going to talk about me outing myself as a Kamala Harris voter, which I have a lot of thoughts on, and I'm getting a lot of feedback on, the tenor of which is maybe about what you would expect, which is that kind of disbelief from the left that they're agreeing with Rob Port on something, and denunciations from the right. But we'll talk about that later in the program. Our guest did not come on to talk about that. Our guest came on to talk about something that North Dakota, I wouldn't say it's a top-of-mind issue for North Dakota voters, but I think it is an important issue. It's been debated in multiple legislative sessions. And in fact, in the last legislative session, a school choice bill passed, only to be vetoed by Governor Burgum, whose argument for it was that he wanted something better. I'm not sure what better means. I guess we would have to ask Governor Burgum about that. But we're continuing to pursue this policy, and in doing so, the legislature is studying it. And, they have a committee that was organized, and the committee is exploring the issue. They're taking testimony on it, and there was some controversy. You probably saw the committee being in the headlines recently for not being open to the public initially. Anyway, the chair of that, what are we calling it? A subcommittee, Senator Axtman? Is that a fair way to put it? Subcommittee?
A task force. It is not related to, so we did study it, and also in the education committee, which was driven by the legislation requiring it to study. So 2 separate groups of individuals, both looking at the issue.
Let's talk a little bit about the headlines about the openness of your task force. I believe there's been a complaint filed. I don't know that the Attorney General's office has ruled on that. You defended it, saying this was the advice we got from Legislative Counsel. Talk a little bit about how the committee came to be closed.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started studying it in my legislative committee, we saw that this is a really big topic, and then we started hearing that, there's other legislators who are submitting legislation for school choice. And when I really tried to wrap my head around it, I knew we were going to deep dive into it through the required study in the Interim Education Policy Committee. But I think there's a lot of opinions and kind of a deep dive that wouldn't be able to happen as thoroughly. And there was going to need to be some more statewide input that wouldn't necessarily we'd be capable of. So when we're looking through avenues of how to collect that data and gather those opinions, there was interest to get a group of individuals together to sit down and really deep dive into that. So not related to the study and not driven by the language of the study, but just really looking at it. It quickly turned into what we call the Educational Opportunities Task Force, because The goal was to not just look at school choice, but look at how we already offer educational opportunities, which ones are working for our state, which ones aren't working, how can we expand those within our already public schools, in our non-public schools. And so it was just a group of individuals who were selected to come together and deep dive. So when that came together, I did ask who I see as my legal counsel, legislative counsel, if they need to be open meetings. I was given the advice that no, they do not, because they are not legislatively driven. So that's advice I follow. But also when I look back on it, Rob, when you look at the format of how they were very different from any other open meeting I've been to. They were, ran maybe more so like a seminar. So we had a speaker who would present some information that was informative. And then we spent most of the time just in small groups, reading legislation, reading ideas from other states, brainstorming together on if there was a framework that would work for North Dakota. So, I asked the advice. I was given the advice that they did not need to be open meetings. So I followed that. But when I think back, I just, I don't even know if the format would have been something that would have been intuitively helpful to be open, as it was really groups of 3 to 4 people sitting around small tables.
Well, Michelle, I disagree. I think it should have been open. I will tell you, I'm a little surprised to learn that the legislative management study is taking place. I follow the meetings that your committee is having pretty closely. The management study that was passed during last session, it said the study must include input from stakeholders, including public, non-public teachers, administrators, parents of students, represented from Department of Public Instruction. As somebody who's the executive director of a group that represents public school teachers, still waiting. Still waiting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was covered in our last meeting. So they did hold the stakeholder survey groups in person or online, so they could commit.
Well, are we talking about the legislative hearing here? Or are we talking about the task force?
Legislative hearings. So,
because I know the task force had some hearings where the Hunt Institute reached out to teachers 6 days before the input session during the first 2 weeks of school to get input. That's not a really open process to get input from teachers.
That same presentation was also presented to the legislative committee.
But were you, so the input that was received was 6 days notice with an email out to a couple of stakeholders. That was how you got input from public school teachers.
It wasn't just emailed out. It was also published on the Secretary of State's website, on DPI's website. The survey was left open for, 2 weeks.
But again, when we're talking about something as big as this, why there wouldn't be more of an effort to collect input in a way that is more proactive from this legislative committee? North Dakota United supported this study because we thought it would be a good opportunity to have good conversations. That what's happening at the legislative committee is not a real study. The real work is being done at the task force. I mean, that's just the reality, the secret task force.
Well, let's let Senator Axtman respond to that. You made an assertion there.
First off, I will correct that. It was not secret. It was briefed that this would be happening as a in parallel in the first legislative committee. So it was briefed on the record. It was even opened up that if anyone in the legislative committee had certain data points, they would want the task force to use the resources to look into and study and gather, that they could ask anyone on the task force. They would look into it and get the answer and present it. So
Senator Axtman, I'm going to interrupt again one time. Being included in the task force is different than being aware that a task force is taking place. I have an email from you on June 4th that said, hey, I'd be happy to tell you what happens at the task force after the task force meetings are done. That's not the same. That's not the same as having people at the task force. Second point on the task force, you have a lobbyist from non-public schools as part of the task force, not one representative of any of the stakeholders from public sector school representatives. This is, again, this is bigger than this task force. I'm so sick of the state having task forces where the outcome is predetermined based on who's in the room and who's not in the room. So why would Shane Gettle, as a lobbyist for private schools, be allowed to be part of this task force but nobody from the administrators, nobody from the school boards, and not one public school teacher is even on this task force. How is that a conversation to get us to a good place?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of representatives from public schools on the task force. There are more representatives from public schools on the task force, as well as we had a representative from EPS who declined to participate. So they were invited as well as Senator Braunberger was invited and declined to participate as well. So it was not meant to be inclusive. It definitely was not secretive. It was trying to gather as much information as we possibly could from a very diverse group of opinions. The outcome was not predetermined. It's still, we still don't know, we're looking at things. We didn't have a direction we knew we were going to go in. I'd love to talk about what we think would work as the framework, because I think we worked really hard on trying to come up with something that is different, affects all students, and helps impact positively education in North Dakota. But I can't, I think anyone who's worked with me in the past knows I like working with diverse groups of people, listening to people's opinions. I don't do anything that is unethical. My integrity is very important to me, Chad. And so I would have never done anything that was meant to not follow the rules or be by the book.
I think the school choice, Jan and I were joking. We were talking about this episode a little bit before, and I was meaning to refer to the fact that he and I have divergent points of view on this, but I said, I care about school choice and you don't. And Chad said, no, I care very much about school choice. We just care about it in different ways. Obviously, it can be a polarizing issue because there are a lot of public educators, Chad personally, and also the organization, North Dakota United, that he works for, has strong feelings about this. To me, I look at it just as a parent and a taxpayer. I think that there are many paths to education success. And I think that school choice can potentially open more paths and make our system more modular and more flexible, depending on how it is. But having this debate is tough. And obviously there's some hard feelings, maybe people who rightly or wrongly feel left out. So Senator, going forward, how would you address that? Like, how do we make sure that we have a fulsome debate so that at the end of this, if we do end up enacting a policy, that even if not everybody likes the policy, we could feel the process behind it was fair?
Well, I think that's what the legislative process is for. So there's not, a bill yet that has been drafted. There's nothing that interim committee can do or a task force can do that would change how we run the state. That's what the legislative process is for. If there is a bill coming forward, we will have a long 80 days to hear and make changes, hear from all interested parties, work together and brainstorm to see how we can come up with a product that, you're right, not everyone's going to be happy with, but we worked really hard to make it something that's the best we can do. And then it's still going to get voted on. So even if we work really hard to make it the best we can, that's not even a shoo-in that it's going to pass. So that's exactly what the legislative process is for.
Senator Axtman, I promise this is going to be my last question or thought on process, and we can go into the actual policy. So the last meeting that was very open, I think because the press made it very open. The expert that you guys brought to the table was a gentleman named Scott Jensen, who works for an organization whose sole purpose is to get privatization programs in place. Scott Jensen is a former legislator who can no longer run for the legislature in Wisconsin because he was charged with using public dollars for campaigns. He pled down from that, but he's still, by law, not allowed to run for office. Why would that be the guy you would choose to bring in who's so one-sided on this issue? I mean, that's their sole purpose, the organization he works for, is to privatize education. And with these sort of ethical issues in his background, why would he be the expert of all the people in the country that you all chose? And I'm still very confused on whose task force this is. I've got an email from Ledge Council that says you're not the chair of the task force. Baszler and the governor's office have told me they gave you options of who to appoint. It was your decision on who to appoint. I don't know whose task force this is. So if you didn't make this decision on Scott Jensen, please let us know who did.
Sure. Yeah. First off, no one was appointed. People were invited to join, and then they could say yes or no. So Scott Jensen had spoken to a lot of North Dakota legislators previously, And he was someone that people really reached out and said, this is someone I would like to hear more from, not because he presents his information one-sided. If you listened, he doesn't. He is very well respected at presenting, what he has seen in other states, learning from other states. In fact, actually, we tried to get him at our interim policy committee because I had very many members say, hey, this is a speaker we want to hear from because of his lengthy knowledge, and he does present it very non-one-sided. So I actually had many members of even my education policy committee request that he speak to us for the study as well. So that is why. So legislators respect how he presents the information and the depth of his experience and knowledge.
But the group he works for is very much a privatization organization funded by Betsy DeVos. So, yeah, I mean, they do have a goal of moving toward privatization.
Correct. But I don't know if someone that has that length and knowledge, what other company they're going to work for. So he was selected not because of who he works for, but how professionally he presents his extensive knowledge.
Well, and if we're going to have a debate about school choice, I think it makes sense. And I think the argument Chad's making is the process here. He feels excluded some of the opponents of this policy, but included proponents. So I don't think the problem is that a proponent, whatever is in Mr. Jensen's background, that a proponent was allowed to present. I think the larger problem is maybe that opponents don't feel like they had their say. Let's focus on the policy, though. Governor Burgum shot down a bill, and it went, I guess, essentially saying that it didn't. I guess I perceived his veto as suggesting that the bill didn't go far enough. Is that your perception as well? And do you have any feedback from what? Now, obviously, that governor is not going to be the governor in the next legislative session. We're going to have a new governor, so maybe his point of view doesn't matter. But do you have any feedback from Governor Burgum about what specifically he's looking for in a school choice policy?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Rob, because I think when we heard that originally, the reason for the veto, we kind of all scratched our heads and scoffed. But now looking back, he was absolutely right. So when we are able to take a step back and study other states and listen to other states, they, I think, would be confused why North Dakota would adopt a voucher bill. That is a really antiquated form of school choice, and it's very immobile. It's hard to actually make an impact to the students you want to make an impact to. There's not a lot of room for growth, for program change. So states are working away from their voucher programs and moving towards more mobile and, like with the times, using more online platforms that can market educational support services. And so I think if we would have adopted a voucher, other states would be like, why are they doing that? That was the earliest form of school choice. And we're trying to work our way away from that.
So put some meat on the bones on where we're heading then. If not, because I think when people say school choice, because vouchers were kind of the first iteration of it, that's what a lot of people think is, I'm going to get money that I can control, that I could send to the school I want to send my kids to. If not that, then what direction are we heading in to get school choice?
Absolutely. Also, the bill, I would say, didn't address public school choice at all. So no private, no charter schools, no magnet schools, no micro schools. So I think that was also a big part that was missing that the governor would have loved to see. But where we're working as a nation. So when we look at where, in terms of school choice movement is moving on the private school choice side, most states are moving towards an ESA, whether that be universal. Many states are seeing that. We have, 3 to 5 states that are now pushing in this next legislative session heavily for expanding to universal or jumping straight into universal ESA programs. But that is by far the fastest growing mechanism for public or for private school choice across the nation. So you don't see voucher programs popping up anymore. You don't see really many tax credit programs standing alone popping up. Some use them to fund their ESAs, but really ESAs are the new mechanism for affecting school choice.
So, Michelle, ESAs aren't new to North Dakota. Rick Becker had an ESA 3 sessions ago that got shot down pretty handily. One of the things that I get frustrated with in this conversation is this doesn't expand school choice. It expands who pays for the school choice. So I have sort of a fundamental question for you is, one, do you agree that there's school choice? But for as long as I've been involved in politics, I've heard from conservatives that churches and charities should figure out sort of how to do this work. The legislature has passed huge tax credits for folks who donate to scholarships to send their kids to private schools. I go up to Shiloh or Light of Christ or Shanley. They have these incredible sports facilities that are so much better than most public school facilities. My fundamental question for you is, why aren't charities and rich donors paying to help kids go to these private schools rather than building football fields? If this is the core goal, is to give more choice to more kids who need it, as a conservative, why are conservatives looking for the government rather than charities and churches to make that happen for the less fortunate?
Good question, Chad. I can't speak to, why people make donations towards certain. Could they make it towards tuition? I assume they can. That's a choice that those people would make, and what drives them to donate towards that facet of private schools. I can't answer for them, Chad. So if we could build stronger,
it might be a cultural thing, and the same reason why at North Dakota State University raising a couple $1 million for a science building is a heavy lift, but they could get $25 million for a football facility. We have some cultural problems here.
But my point is, often when we talk about social safety nets for for welfare programs and all that kind of thing, literally you'll see Republicans stand up and say, we need charities and we need churches to step up. I don't understand why this is different. Again, the legislature 2 sessions ago, we didn't fight it. North Dakota United and other public sector groups didn't fight it, creating a situation for donors to be able to donate to help poor kids, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, doing what's good without the government intervention. Why isn't that enough? Like, why can't we just have individuals figure this out with the government without the government setting up a new platform?
Chad, I think we could maybe, as part of ESA, some states have found a way to help shift donations towards the education. And so you see some smart shifts in what like Arkansas is doing in terms of driving corporate and individual donations, where it is more beneficial for them if those go into funding an ESA program, so that then it does affect tuition and giving an option for. So within policy, I think some states are figuring out really, innovative ways to help shift those donations to actually impact tuition for families that need it. So that is something that I'm also looking at, how states are starting to do that, because then maybe we can overcome that cultural shift and affect tuition rather than the sports facilities. So I think that's an option within the funding mechanism. But I would love to tell you guys about kind of the framework that I personally, and I think others personally would think, would make North Dakota different and would really work well in North Dakota if school choice is something that we get on board with.
Well, let's do it. Tell us.
Okay. Sounds good. So, and this derived from us hearing from people both in education policy and in the task force. And a question I heard when every speaker came up, they said, okay, I just want to ask the question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but every state that you mentioned, no, they cannot access any of these dollars, ESA, voucher, if they accept and go to the public schools. And every time we heard yes. Okay, so they can't participate if they enroll in their local public school. And every time they said yes, we asked, well, why? And so what we found out is we just kept asking why. And so then they said, well, there's nothing legally that would prevent that. This is just how it's done. And so that drove us to say, well, what if we didn't do that? What if we did it different here in North Dakota? And I think that's where we came to shift away. And I personally shifted away from it being really about school choice and what school you choose, but rather how you choose to support your individual student and your family. So I said, well, what if we did allow public school students to take advantage of these marketplaces that are built through ESAs are incredible. It's an online shopping platform where it's just an array of educational supports, whether that be for autism, for speech therapy, for science and STEM camps, for coding courses, language courses. These are great marketing tools to help students. Why would we not want our public school families to have access to that? And especially when we look at the, new challenges our public schools are facing when they have an ever growing number of students who need unique special services, we can't expect our public schools to keep up with that. It's a demand that's growing too fast for them to support all these unique needs of our students. And so why don't we come up with a way where we can have positive, innovative partnerships with outside contracting, outside services that can provide these niche supports that our schools aren't able to. So those are kind of the things that drove this new framework. So what I would love to see as a state, if we support this program, is a tiered system that is more than just private school choice. So a tiered system where there's a tier for public school families to be able to access the marketplace and have dollars to allocate to shop on the marketplace for their student. So whether that be they do something in the summer. And what I love about this is North Dakota can choose what is on the marketplace. So whether that be school lunches, right? We couldn't pass school lunches. What if we put it on the marketplace where then families can, if that's something that they would like to spend money on, they could allocate their ESA funds towards school lunches. Maybe it's summer care, after school care, whatever they feel like would best support their individual student and learner. So I think that would really help alleviate stressors of our public school system. It would allow families to really impact their individual student. I think it helps remove that divide between rural and urban, because I think rural students, there's some things that, you can't expect Harvey to offer Mandarin, of course, right? They probably only have one student who wants it. But what if now on the marketplace, we have an approved provider that has even maybe a college accredited Mandarin course that they can direct these funds to, that they can use to support and just build upon their already, 8 to 3 education. So I get really excited about, the marketplace being a vessel to drive innovation and new platforms that families can easily access.
Michelle, can I jump in here? I think if that's what the whole thing was, I think you'd have a lot of support for it, right?
Yeah,
my understanding that there's several tiers in here.
We're getting there, Kat.
Yeah, okay. We're down to 3 minutes, so I just want to make sure that it's my understanding the private school students who make that choice get more money, public schools get less, and homeschoolers get less. So my question for you, and you can go into the private school as well, why not just give everybody the same amount of money, or why not just give everybody universal lunch, and then those parents can use that money to fund their tuition at their private school or all these other services without big government getting involved? They can just, Michelle, I sound like a Republican, but why don't we just let people keep their money and make their choices? They can spend it however they want, rather than setting up this, or we could set up the fancy platform and parents could still go there without the government doing this.
I think part of it said the money needs to be there. So some students already have lunch paid for, it. Some schools, everyone gets lunch. I'd love those students to still get the opportunity to have advancement on top of their support, because maybe those are the students that need it most. And so I don't think we're going to touch everyone if we do one versus the other. I like integrating it all into one system. I also don't think as many parents are going to search on the marketplace if there's not an opportunity to have funds in there to use them. So I think that is a vessel that...
why more for private schools than public schools?
Yeah.
Why not just give everybody the same amount of money to make these choices? If a private school parent decides they want to spend it on tuition, go for it. And public schools who are choosing the publicly available government-funded option could spend it on other things. Why not just have the same amount? I think you'd have a lot more buy-in than rather this multiple tiered system.
Yeah, Chad, well, that's the whole school choice debate, right? Because if we only do $1,000 for everyone, we're not going to see new schools pop up in the private school sector. Maybe we'd fill more slots. I don't know if $1,000 across the board would do that, but that's going to be the debate: is do you believe in that or not? Do you believe that we need more options out there for families? No new schools are going to pop up if if the educational support isn't there on all fronts. And there are, who's going to want to open a new school that says, we're going to charge $5,000 in tuition, but our cost to educate is $8,000. So that's going to be the debate, Chad, is do you believe that families in North Dakota are going to be better served if we create a program that spurs new schools, new offerings? So that's where you and I think are on the opposite sides of that. And that's what's going to be debated in the legislative process would be tier 2. So you're right. The majority of the money will be going to tier 1. And I don't know who wouldn't be on board with Tier 2 is where the debate's going to be, and Tier 3 is going to be where the debate is.
Yeah. So, Rob, I feel like I'm dominating this, like you've dominated a couple ones recently, but this is in my wheelhouse. And again, like, this is why I think having opponents in that task force would have been helpful to talk these things through and to poke holes and do all those.
We did, Chad. We did. We have quite a few task force members who don't agree, who said, I don't think I could ever get on board with this, but if you do Tier 2, here would be my things I think would make it better. We did. We absolutely got
that is absolutely fair, Michelle. That is right. I mean, and I will say the administrators you had on there are very, very solid folks. So the other thing I just want to hit on really quickly is one of the things that drives me crazy about this debate is when proponents say it'll be new money. It'll be new money. Don't worry. Anytime there's money, the legislature can choose to spend it on a school choice program, put in the K through 12 formula, buy down property taxes. So, I mean, when you say new money, are you creating a new tax to just fund this program? And that'll start a whole new conversation.
Yeah, I don't want to do that today. Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I mean, this idea that it's magically new money when it's all in the same pot and could be appropriated for anything, it doesn't ring true.
Yeah, I don't think I ever would say it's new money, Chad. I understand how the budgeting works. However, it's not going to take away from the formula. Now, could someone say, well, by not taking away, you could take all that money and push it into the formula? Sure, but where is that getting us? That doesn't go always directly to students. I want something that truly directly right away impacts students and families. And I think this is going to do it. So when we even look at, Chad, like how many ways has DPI given schools the opportunity to take advantage of innovation waiver and how few have done it? So I'm not always confident that just pumping into the formula is going to directly impact students and families. And I'd like to find a way to do that. So you're right. It's not new money. I am working on some creative ways to fund it and looking at how states have created almost a new bucket where this would be a separate bucket. I don't want it tied to the formula. If we don't feel like we're supporting transportation costs, building costs, sped costs, let's fix that in the formula and let's make this something that is solely just about students.
Michelle, one thing that you and I would certainly agree on is that public schools are not taking advantage of that waiver the way they should be, and it frustrates me as well. So I appreciate that point. Rob, welcome back to the debate.
Yeah, and you'll notice that I didn't whine about Chad dominating the debate like you did with me. I'm kidding. I thought that was a great discussion. I'm very enthusiastic about some of these ideas. I realize that other people may not be, but I think I like the idea of innovating, and I like the idea of bringing flexibility in, and in particular, flexibility that's controlled by parents and obviously students themselves. I really like that idea. So I'm enthusiastic about where this is heading. I hope that we can execute in some of the ways you've described, but we got to end it there. Thank you so much for coming on.
Michelle, can you stay for another hour and a half? I've got some other follow-up questions on how accountability works.
We'll just chat. If you just form your own channel, and then you can, you and I.
There we go. And if nobody will listen, it'll just be me talking to people and for my own sort of feeling good about that.
Yes. We didn't even get into charter schools, Rob and Chad, which I'm so excited about the opportunity for that as well. So,
Michelle, I think there could be some agreement there on public charters and how that would work. So I do think this is a bigger conversation than just giving money to parents to pay tuition at a private school. And I appreciate the fact that you're having that. I just wish there would have been more people at the table. Last shot at the test. Last one.
We're gonna 80 days to be at the table, Chad, and I know I will see you there a lot.
All right.
We're gonna end it there. Michelle, thank you.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. I thought that was a very good. Now, obviously, those of you listening, you know that Chad, and I have a bias in this too. I mean, I have a point of view on this, but Chad also has a point of view. He works for North Dakota United, which represents North Dakota's public workers and North Dakota's teachers. And, they have strong feelings when we start talking about big feelings we start talking about
big feelings.
about school choice. But I thought that was a very productive conversation. And Jed, in the interim, you said something that I thought was interesting. You're saying that this has more nuance. This isn't just a straight vouchers approach that they're going for. This has more nuance to it. And you characterized it as, it makes it harder for me to argue against. And I would say, well, that's good policymaking, right?
Right. Well, I would just say there's a reason why Senator Axtman and others who talk about this start with the ESA for public school kids, right? Because that's the palatable piece to the vast majority of parents who send their kids to public schools, right? They're like, hell yeah, I'll take
I could take some money and spend it on a tutor for my kid if they're struggling with math or
counseling. I love the idea that it's potentially for summer, and I'll
go to a computer programming camp. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff we could do.
There's different opportunities, rural and urban, and I think you made the point during the break. It's hard to imagine a solution for that, and we shouldn't necessarily punish kids in urban settings. The complicated part comes when you start funding tuition into private schools, and what does that accountability look at the private schools, right? So I've heard that these ESAs for private school kids will be about half the per pupil payments, so like $5,000. So if a private school, if Light of Christ, is getting $5,000 of public dollars because of somebody's choice, what does that mean for accountability in terms of that private school taking kids with behavioral issues? My fear is we end up with a system where Johnny goes to St. Mary's and smacks a teacher, and the next day he's at Bismarck High, right? Because that's the way it works. Public schools don't get to say no to people. So I think that sort of nuanced conversation about what does this look like in terms of accountability is going to be really, really important. Michelle Axtman is a good senator. She understands policy. She's better at politics than she gives herself credit for. But I wish this is why this task force was bigger, so we could have had more conversations. And don't get me wrong, again, to her point, there's some great, Levi Bachmeier is on that committee, the West Fargo business manager, and the conversations I've had, there is, how do you include universal lunch in this? How do you include all these different after-school programs, pre-K programs, those kind of things?
I understand why you're enthusiastic about including lunch in there. I guess I don't want to put it in a situation where a family has to choose between sending their very precocious, very smart kid to coding camp or using that money to pay for school lunch. I just want to fund school lunches. I just want to take that off the plate of every North Dakota family, and that this can be separate.
I would agree with that. That would be my idea.
I don't want to make it down like our kid's really smart and there's this camp we really want him to go to, but we had to use the money to pay for school lunch because we struggle to make ends meet. I think that would be tough. I don't think school lunch should be in there. I really, because to me, I really like the metaphor of many paths, and I think it works in so many places in life. I think when you let people choose for themselves, I think most people make good decisions, and I think they can make more efficient decisions a lot of times than what the government can make for them. And I think sometimes we treat education like a factory where we're pumping kids in one end and spewing out graduates on the other end. And don't get me wrong, I love our public schools. I'm a product of the Minot Public School System. My wife teaches in the Minot Public School System. I have a daughter who graduated from the Minot Public School System. I have two more that are working their way through. I think the Minot Public School System is very, very good. I do think that in our system, we could introduce some more flexibility and more opportunity to enhance that. And also, along with it, I don't mind enhancing. I do two things that worry me, and I think the two of the same things that worry you. I don't want to drain money from public schools to fund these other things. I think that's a mistake. I think we got to keep our commitment to our public schools. This is an add-on that's gonna serve us in other ways. And then the other thing is, I am worried about the accountability part of it. I don't want any crackpot to start a homeschooling program or a private school. And I'm not running down our existing private schools, but if you put money on the table, there's going to be people who start up ventures to capture that money. So I am very concerned about accountability and also, maybe more accountability for existing private schools if they choose to take this money. It maybe should come with it should come with a magnifying glass.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's right. If they choose to participate in this program, I could see that some private schools would not want to participate in this program. The other sort of thing that needs to be on you can't have private schools that if the ESA is $5,000, they raise their tuition by $5,000, right? So there has to be some sort, and you can't say you can.
That's what happened in higher ed. I mean, we made lots of free money available in student loans, and what happened? The schools jacked up tuition rates and cost of attending, and captured all that quote unquote free money, although it wasn't free given the student loan crisis we have in this country right now.
And it's happened in other states where private schools have jacked up prices, and next thing you know, the school has it. But I do every time I go to a football game at Shiloh or drive by the Golden Dome in North Bismarck, I do get frustrated at this idea that they can fund and I think your connection to NDSU and college sports is right on. Why can private schools fund those things, but can't fund scholarships for kids to attend their schools?
It's a priorities problem. It's a priorities problem in our culture. And I'm not saying that you're wrong applying it in this specific instance. I'm saying it's so much bigger than this instance when we have money for football. I mean, even in our, I mean, the people do donate. I mean, our public schools have foundations and things, and people do donate money. And I'll tell you, a lot of that money goes to sports and new football uniforms and everything else. And not a lot of money's going to math camp sometimes.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I was on the Bismarck Public Schools Foundation for a while. The only money that went to sports from the Bismarck Public Schools Foundation was to provide equipment for kids who couldn't afford it otherwise. But other than that, it was going to music instruments for kids, scholarships, that kind of thing. And every foundation is different.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I feel like this is, I feel like the fact that you're a little frustrated that this is harder to argue against makes it, and I'm not saying that to be mean to you. I think it means we're heading in a good direction with this.
Well, and the problem is it's not just harder to argue against. There are going to be some really, really good things in this bill, and it's going to be super broad. So it's going to come down to, for all the organizations, for all the legislators, weighing the good and the bad, right? I mean, there's going to be things that I hate in this thing. There's also going to be things that, hey, if we can help expand pre-K through this program or access to other programs. I mean, the one thing I will say is, when I talk to teachers, the lack of sort of services for behavioral health issues and that kind of thing is a real problem. So is there a way to use these ESA for public school kids to get those behavioral health services outside of the school?
Yeah. If your kid has a behavioral problem, if your kid has dyslexia, if your kid has autism, if they have these challenges, I mean, right now, a lot of families, I mean, the public schools can provide a degree of service, but we all know if they had more money, they could get more, and it would really help those kids. And I mean, just think what it does for those kids. The kid who can stay engaged in the classroom is less likely to have problems later in life. They're more likely to achieve more economically. They're less likely to become involved with drugs and alcohol. They're less likely to commit crimes. I mean, the benefits for that are almost immeasurable. And if we can get there by maybe having to swallow some pills we don't like because they're priorities for other people, I don't have a problem with that, depending on what the laws are.
The flip side of that, of course, is could that money be going into the public schools to fund more resources for these kind of things? Potentially, yes. Because the other concern I have is, what about the crappy parents? And the reality is there's a lot of crappy parents who aren't going to access these services for their kids. And so what do we do to help them make sure they're accessing these things? Because a lot of the times, having the programs right there in the school is the only way these kids get services. So if we're now saying, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you're getting $1,500 to go up to this therapy session, so we don't have to have this in the school anymore, what does that mean for those other kids that are left behind whose parents maybe don't have their crap together the way they wish they would?
That's fair. But again, I don't think that you can, most parents are good parents. And I don't think that you can deny additional, because one of the things I think this allows is it allows us, when you provide a service, a blanket service, it's just fundamentally going to be less efficient. Doing this means my kid doesn't need help with dyslexia because my kid doesn't have dyslexia, so I can spend that money differently. I think it makes it more efficient, more adaptive, more flexible. Those are the benefits that kind of offset the concern that you're talking about. But again, I want to have a weather eye towards not allowing something like this to drain resources from our existing school programs.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would have liked to get into, again, I wasn't kidding, we could have talked to Michelle about this for 2 hours because there is so much nuance, is there sort of a threshold, income threshold for families to access this money to pay tuition for private schools? Is there a phase-in period, or is it everybody tomorrow? So my neighbors who have 4 kids going to private schools, they've already made that choice, right? They made that choice 10 years ago. Are we now funding choices that have already been made? She alluded to wanting to open up more private schools. I don't know that that's my goal. That wouldn't be my goal. But I don't think you get to what she said her goal was by just funding the vast majority going to parents who've already made that choice. So I think there's some nuance of who gets this money, how do you qualify it, is there economic threshold?
Well, I think especially if we want, because I think one of the things that sometimes your side of the debate overlooks is you say, well, there's not a lot of opportunity for choice now. My argument would be if you make the resources available, those opportunities people will create programs in order to provide services to capture this money. And I'm saying, well, we were just talking about there may be some charlatans in that and we need to protect against them, but there may be some good people, qualified people who's like, well, there's a market for this now. I'm going to provide this service. The more opportunities are going to come up. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't want to means test this. I think that would be a mistake. But also I think I don't want to just create a pipeline for money into the status quo. We need to create this program in a way that in turn drives the creation of more opportunities and more flexibility for North Dakota parents and students.
Listen, I'm always going to be no public dollars to private school tuition. I mean, that's just sort of my fundamental line in the sand. But if we're going to do this, we need to make sure there's accountability for these private schools. With all public dollars, we should be doing that. We should make sure it's not just us subsidizing choices that have already been made. I think we should also, it seemed like Michelle was open to maybe there's a way to leverage these dollars for more private investment as well to pay for tuition for people. I think there's just and the other thing, half of the per pupil payment is not going to pay tuition at most of our private schools. Is that enough? Like if somebody can't afford tuition, they can't afford tuition, right? And so you get them halfway there. If they can't come up with the other half of the money, that doesn't do them any good. So, it's one of those things where I'd want it to be as small as possible. But again, I wish we would have had a real study of this over the last 18 months to have these conversations we're now having 2.5 months.
That was one of the frustrating where they were talking about, they're talking about the things that they're yet to do in terms of coalition building's the wrong word, but having a robust debate about it. Well, it's October. The legislative session starts in January.
And you set up a situation where groups like NDU, NDCL school boards is like, screw you guys. You didn't invite us to the table here. Right. We're going to we're predisposed to be opposed to these things, right? But it's even more like, hey, you didn't even give us a seat at the table.
I think it's a mistake to lock you guys out. And I don't want to make it seem like that's what Senator Axtman was trying to do. But I think it's a mistake. I don't think they need to be afraid of your opposition. I think what they need to do is craft a policy that makes you very, very uncomfortable in opposition. That's the way to win this debate. And I think at the end of it, I think to get some of the things you want, you're going to have to swallow some pills you don't like. I think that's just democracy. But right. I'm really excited. I am glad we're thinking this way. I think all the time, just as a parent thinking about, camps that I'd like to send my kids to or opportunities that I'd like that just aren't in the family budget. And if we had, and when you're talking about like bad parents, you got to remember, it's not like parents who maybe don't prioritize their kids the way they should. It's not like they can just take that money down to McDonald's and blow it on Happy Meals.
Sure.
Sure. If they're gonna access that money, they're gonna have to spend it on things for their kids.
Yeah. And again, I just keep going back to why can't we have all the things that you're talking about right there for public schools and private schools? Have this dashboard without private school kids getting more money than public school kids.
Because sometimes you have to compromise. So, and the thing is,
I'm compromising by saying private school kids should get anything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have the antipathy towards private schools that you do. And not that I guess that's the wrong way to describe it.
Here's my concern. I don't want the government to use public dollars to subsidize a bunch of folks who have already made this choice and can afford it. to send their kids to private schools unless the private schools are going to start playing by many of the same rules that public schools play by. It's unfair to have public schools take every kid, regardless of their learning ability or their behavioral health or all these different things, and then allow private schools to get public dollars and they get to pick and choose who they're. It creates a situation of haves and have-nots in this situation. We need to be really careful about that, that we're making sure everybody's playing by the same rules.
I can agree with that. Let's shift gears. What else do we want to talk about? Let's
talk about you voting for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I want to describe. I wrote about it in my column, but I really want to expand on it because I got a phone call, or not a phone call. I got an email today, this morning after the column went up from a school teacher that I had that I really liked, that I thought really liked me, that called me a traitor and a communist for saying that I was going to vote for Kamala Harris. I want to be crystal clear for people wondering why I would make this choice, because there's a lot of Republicans out there I know who are dancing on the edge of this choice. And I will tell you that what put me over the top is the idea that I don't think that you can be participating in democracy unless you're willing to vote. You're not participating in democracy if you're never willing to vote against your party. I don't see how you can be. Like if a politician or a political party can rely on your vote no matter what they do, you are not participating in democracy. You have got to be willing to vote against them. And as conservatives, we should believe in the free market, right? And belief in the free market means I think that that products or services or business models that don't work should fail. Right? I don't want to keep in existence things that don't work. And so how do you bring that into politics? Well, candidates that don't work should fail. Somebody who is leading the Republican Party in a direction that is not just detrimental to the Republican Party itself, but is detrimental to the United States of America, it should fail. Now, I voted a straight Republican ticket outside of the presidential race because that's where my heart is. That's where I am philosophically. People like Kevin Cramer, Kelly Armstrong, Julie Fedorchak, and on down the list are more likely to govern in the way that I want than Katrina Christensen and Trigby Hammer and Mero Pepcorn. It's just a reality. But when it comes to the president of the United States, I don't like the way he acts. I don't like the fact that he tried to overthrow the last election. I don't like the fact that he inspired a mob to try to lynch his own vice president. I don't like the incessant lies, the disgusting behavior. I don't think he's somebody that I want my children looking up to. And let's be clear, there aren't a lot of politicians I want my kids looking up to in general. But the thing is I think Donald Trump has ushered in a level of normalized rhetoric that I find repugnant. I'm not going to vote for that. And I'm not just going to look aside and say, well, Kamala Harris is a liberal Democrat, and she's going to do a lot of things that not just make me uncomfortable, that make me upset as president. But I look at her, she's Jimmy Carter. I can live with 4 years of Jimmy Carter. We've had bad presidents on both sides of the aisle before. We can live another one. I don't know that we can survive somebody who is actively attacking the foundations of our republic. So that's why I voted the way I did. Not because I like Kamala Harris, but because I don't like Donald Trump. And my philosophy in the past was I want to vote for a candidate, not against the candidate. But I decided in this instance, had to be done.
So I think, first of all, I sort of stopped listening when you said a public school teacher called you a communist. That's something.
Former public school teacher. But
okay.
One of my teachers. That was,
that's something. It's interesting. You didn't give me a heads up that this column was coming out, so I read it right away this morning. And you and I have obviously talked a lot about this. I've asked you the question: if Donald Trump is so terrible for the democracy and the future of this country, why not bite the bullet? And at that point, you were very much, I'm going to do what I've done the last couple cycles. I think what you did is really important. I think it gives permission to other people who maybe feel uncomfortable with Donald Trump to vote for maybe 4 years of some politics you don't like to get things back on track. I had a story this week of a conservative in Fargo who put a Harris Wall sign in front of his house because he wanted to send a message to his neighbors, even though he's had all these Republican signs, that he's sick of this. He's sick of Donald Trump. He's sick of this stuff going on, and hoping to give his neighbors, the ability to feel comfortable voting for Kamala Harris. It's not going to matter in North Dakota. But I still think it's sort of a message that gets sent. And maybe some of the people that you and I talk to off record, that say, oh, I hate this guy, he's terrible, but then publicly say, we love this guy, he's wonderful. Maybe it'll give them permission to vote for Kamala Harris as well.
And the thing I would remind you is you don't necessarily have to talk about it. You don't have to be visible about it if you don't want to. That's one of the protections that our electoral process affords us, is the privacy of the ballot box. So when you're in there voting, or in my case, sitting at my desk at home because I voted absentee, but when you're with your ballot, you're alone. Nobody else has a right to know how you vote. So vote your conscience. And I would say this is bigger than Donald Trump, because I look at some of the, Democrats rallied around Anthony Weiner for a while, longer than probably they should have. They rallied around Bob Menendez longer than they should have. And the thing is that there comes a point, there has to be red lines for you as a voter. And when the candidate or the party that you prefer cross those red lines, you have got to make them pay for it. Otherwise, what are we doing? And I don't think enough of us are. If you look at the re-election rates for incumbents in Congress, well, Congress consistently has an approval rating around, 10%, 9%, and yet 80-90% of incumbents are getting elected every election cycle, re-elected. We're not doing what we're supposed to be doing as citizens if that's happening. If you really feel that way about your incumbents, vote for somebody else.
Yeah, it's remarkable how little crossover voters there are. When you think about North Dakota, there's been elections in the past where John Hoeven and Kent Conrad both got 70% of the vote, right? I mean, it was a normal thing for people to vote for competence, not necessarily just their party. Now, if you look at the ballot, I guarantee there's not going to be a huge amount of change between Kelly Armstrong, Julie Fedorchak, and Kevin Kramer. And not saying that any of them are not competent. I think they are competent, but I think their opponents have ran different degrees of competent campaigns against them. But I think we're in such a place where we just go in, we vote for our team, and we leave. That there's not a lot of nuance. And I mean, could you imagine, Rob, in this day and age, Kent Conrad and John Hoeven both getting 70% on the same ballot?
I don't think Kent Conrad would win in North Dakota anymore.
Oh, I don't think so either. Oh, I should say, like any Democrat in any, like having that big of split between the top vote getter on the Democrat side and Republican side. We're so
last time it really happened was Heidi Heitkamp, and she barely won.
So she was outperforming by 15%. I was talking about Erin, her last election here in District 35. She had to outperform the top vote getter, which was Heidi Heitkamp in 2018, by I think 15 points in order to win, or 10 points or something like that. And that's from door-to-door campaigning, right? That's just getting to know your neighbors and whatever. It's harder to do on a statewide basis. But yeah, we don't have a lot of thoughtful folks going in. And now I sound like the guy who was taking shots at the voters. That's usually your role to do that. But sometimes it doesn't feel like we have the most thoughtful decisions being made.
I think that I wrote this a while ago. We don't blame the voters enough for what is going on right now, because a lot of times we'll talk about it and we talk about, well, the media is doing it, or social media is doing it, or the political parties or the candidates or the big money donors, they're doing it. And a lot of it is no, I don't want to discount any of those factors because there's no one variable, but a variable we don't talk about enough is the voters voting for the same thing over and over and over again, and then expecting things to change. It's just not going to happen. We don't have enough politicians in this country who are scared of losing an election. That is a big problem in our nation right now. And there's really nobody. We could talk about gerrymandering. That's a factor in some parts of the country. We could talk about some of those factors. But a big one is voters just, I'm on a team and I'm voting for that team, and it's happening right, it's happening left. It came to a head for me with Donald Trump, but you got to be willing to contemplate at least voting for the other side. You have to be willing to at least think about it, or you are not doing your job as a citizen.
So now that I know that you voted, I want to ask you how you voted on a couple things. You ready?
Oh, man.
So how did you end up voting on Measure 2? I know you were leaning for it at one point, then leaning against it after we had the conversation.
Yeah, I voted against it. The part of it that I like, Measure 2, by the way, is the reform to the initiated measure process. I think everybody knows I don't like the initiated measure process. The part of Measure 2 that I like I do like having people vote twice. I think it expands the timeline for debating some of these. I think sometimes it's too short. I think voting on them twice gives us more time to have articulate arguments about it. I do like that. I don't think, although I'm not philosophically opposed to raising the signature limit for ballot measures, I don't know that it addresses the fundamental problem, which is big money interests coming in and just basically buying their way onto the ballot. They have enough money, whether we're having 4% of the statewide population to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot or 5%, which is what Measure 2 does. They're going to have enough money to pay that. We need to really think of a way to address that. And also the amendment bans out-of-state petitioners. That's already illegal under statute. I don't know that really changes anything. So,
how about Measure 3?
Measure 3 is the legacy fund. I voted for that.
Okay, so am I, and I've had a lot of people ask. That seems like the one where people are like, "Hey, I don't know about this."
The forum came out against it, and they were concerned about restraining our ability to spend it. As a conservative, I'm not. That's something that troubles me.
And as somebody who's left of center but doesn't really trust how the legislature current makeup spends it, I say lock it up for as long as possible.
Since I opposed the legacy fund when we created it, because I don't necessarily think it's good policy to just stack people's tax dollars in and to see how high we could stack them. That being said, if we're going to have it, I like the idea of turning it into a real sovereign wealth fund that we could potentially use to fundamentally alter some North Dakotans' relationship with their government. Now, I don't ever want to get to a point where the legacy fund's just paying for everything, because I think everybody's got to have some skin in the game when it comes to paying for their government. But I think there's some cool things we could do if we grow it large enough, and it's not nearly large enough now. So I say restrict it, keep growing it, and let's have another debate about what to do with it down the line.
Yeah, I keep thinking about this Common Schools Trust Fund and what that has meant for education in the state. And if we didn't have that, what that would mean for people's tax levels. And so I think we can be fiscally conservative and fiscally thoughtful when we put money away without completely tying people's hands, because there's still a way to spend some of that interest. So
well, I think something like the debate that we just had about, funding education opportunities in some creative ways, maybe legacy fund earnings are a way that we go about doing that, where we make, we talk about making new revenue available. Well, maybe there it is. Those are the sort of innovative things that I think we could be thinking about.
Speaking of new revenue, how about we pass Measure 5 and weed pays for these things?
I don't think marijuana is going to be the revenue bit, but I did vote for that, just because I don't think the existing policy is working. I don't think we're not stopping anybody who wants marijuana from getting marijuana. So I'm all in favor of letting the Chamber Commerce crowd come in and just as a business, and deal with the problem, the problems with addiction and everything else. Just deal with them out in the open rather than being a black market. That being said,
you're spending weed revenue on education. That's wow.
I don't think. Well,
I was kidding. I don't think that's a good message for us to spit.
Also, I don't think it's going to be the revenue bonanza that people think.
I think you're right. But I think that the marketing campaign of smoke it up to pay for our kids' education is probably not a good look for our state.
Well, don't we use that? I love that we use North Dakota lottery revenues to fight gambling addiction, which seems at cross purposes.
I would assume some of this money would be used for addiction stuff as well. I would think.
I think so, and those problems are going to exist. And I don't even necessarily disagree with Pat Finken, who is that it's going to create some new problems. I think it will, but it's also going to get rid of some old problems. And on the balance, I think it'd be better for our state. So I voted yes on.
And I keep thinking about one of the arguments is today's weed is so much more powerful than the ditch weed of the 70s or whatever. Isn't that a statement to regulate it more? Yeah. Rather than just having it on the black market. But
I don't, if it's in a package, there's some. I don't know what it's got to be something akin to like the proof system for alcohol, where you know how strong a bottle of liquor is. Like, that's a standard, and they can't just put any number they want on there. Like, that's regulated, and it helps people understand what I'm getting when I use this product. If we can do that for marijuana, I think that addresses the problem that he's talking about. When you're buying marijuana from some black market dealer, you don't know what's in it, and sometimes you hear horror stories where they mix the marijuana with fentanyl or something weird like that. That's not going to happen from the Chamber of Commerce crowd selling pot in a legal dispensary.
Yep, for sure. Well, I'm glad we're able to go through.
You want to ask me how I voted on Measure 4?
I feel like I know, but hey, how do you vote on Measure 4?
I voted no. It's a terrible idea. Yeah, I did. It's a terrible idea, and I look forward to it failing so it can clear the path, so we can have a debate about and I hope we have one, because we didn't after the 2012 measure failed. I mean, we did some things on property taxes. They didn't work. So we're going to we need to do something pretty dramatic, I think, or eventually one of these bad ideas is going to pass at the ballot box, and
Right.
we're going to regret it.
Well, at some point, groups like the one I represent are not going to continue to be able to fight these fights every 12 years because it's a lot, right? It's a lot. What's that?
It's a lot of money.
Yep, and a lot of time.
We're going to end it there. Thank you so much for listening. Coming up on Friday, we are going to continue our conversation about education. We're going to have the two superintendent candidates. This is a nonpartisan race, although both of them are Republicans. Kirsten Baesler was not endorsed. She did seek, but was not endorsed by the North Dakota Republican Party. Their endorsed candidate took third in the primary. Jason Heitkamp is the other. Kirsten Baesler's the incumbent. Jason Heitkamp is the challenger. He's a former Republican state senator. That's coming up on the show on Friday. Be sure to tune in. Thank you so much for listening. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Send me an email at rport@forumcom.com. That's forumcom with 2 M's.com. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.